Good morning. Hemshech Ayin Beis, we are continuing the review of the conclusion of the Hemshech, and we are on page 1412, Aleph Tov Yud Beis. In some ways, the Rebbe Rashav is bringing the whole picture back together, that there are different levels in the interface of how we experience and integrate and internalize and ultimately connect with the divine and with the highest levels of divine, of Elikus. And namely, he referred to three levels, what he called three madregas, Klolus, Elikus, Mamal Kalalman, Sovev Kalalman, and Atzmus, Ein Sof, that's higher than both. And they correspond to the three Ahavas in Avodah, V'ahavtas Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha, Mamal Kalalman, b'chol Nafshecho, Sovev Kalalman, and b'chol Moedecha, as we'll learn later on page 1424, is Atzmus Ein Sof b'chol Moedecha, the third higher level. We are up to now, we learned about Mamal Kalalman. That was the previous page, 1411 and 1412. Now we're middle of Sovev Kalalman. The Mamal Kalalman, just sum up briefly, is a divine energy as it's channeled, or called misamsim, diminished and tailored toward the particular parameters of each creation and each part of existence. In Avodah, when we contemplate that everything in existence really is the divine energy within it, and that's the Iker, so that meant to develop, that develops and generates an emotion, a feeling of love and longing to connect and to actualize and reveal and be mamshech that Eir Eliki. So it's hamshacha within existence, revealing it. The limitation of it is that it's the parameters, like he says, b'hagbola, lefi eifenei zbarnus, measured according to the level of contemplation, and it's also hagbola because each level has its own divine, the energy that fits and tailored to its eiris bekelim, mamal kalam, and therefore he called that all hamshacha, not aliyah v'iskalus yitziyah. It's not suspending, it's not stripping itself of being engaged with existence. On the contrary, it's revealing the divine within existence. Then comes, that's Mamal Kalam. That is only, however, ha'ara, a reflection, what he calls shebe'en harech legaba atzmus ein sof. Meaning, as he says soon, Sovev Kalam, that this ha'ara is only the divine energy as it relates to existence. There's a whole dimension of Elikus that's beyond that. Because it's only imcha and tofel, that which God serves as a source of life. Then there is the level of chai be'etzem, like he called it, atzmus ein sof, that's higher than islapshus be'elmus chai be'etzem, not chai lahachis, chai ha'elamim. It still relates to elamim because it's the primary force that creates, but it's removed. It doesn't engage with, it's not involved in the affairs of existence direct way. It's more from an amakivdika way. And there's no ischalkus ma'ala mata, there's no hierarchy, even though there are levels in makifim, like he said, like we learned earlier in the beginning of Ayin Beis, but overall it's a makif that is an equalizer. And then the root of Mamal and Sovev are the two levels of Alei Saratzen and Kedem Alei Saratzen, the level that arose in his desire to create existence before the Tzimtzum, and the root of Sovev Klamen is Kedem Alei Saratzen, prior to that level, as he says in the parentheses. And that's where we stopped. Now he's going to continue. So what's the Avodah? The Avodah Mamal Kalam, we learned, is the love and the longing and the tshuka to reveal that divine within every aspect of within ourselves and within existence. What is the Avodah in Avodah Sovev Kalam, which initially you would think it's removed from us? So how can we relate to it? And yet it is a level that we're also taught about, and God didn't create it for himself. It's also for us. It's another level, a higher level of divine experience. And we're going to learn this would be called a transcendent divine experience. But neshamas have access to that as well. Even though existence, you'd say, is primarily engaged with mamala kalaman, but remember, neshamas, even when they come down below, they're still connected to the highest levels. They're just not revealed. But now, through the contemplation, Sovev kalaman will now realize there's another level of Avedis Hashem, which is going to be ultimately called B'chol Nafshecho. Mesiris Nefesh B'chol Nafshecha, which is the level of, like he said before, who? That is Alma Diskasya, but through Bina helps us reach that level. So even though it's a level of transcendence and it's concealed, but we still have access to it, as he's going to explain now. So it's, of course, a higher level, and in stages of Aveda, even though he doesn't say it explicitly, it makes sense that first you reach B'chol Levavcha, then once you've done that, you can now come and say, okay, now I've experienced the divine within existence. Now I come to next contemplation, is the divine defined by existence? And the answer is no. Like I mentioned, you can teach a child that God is the one that drives everything in existence, the bread that comes out of the earth, every other bracha that we make, and just in general, all of the creation. But like I always give the example, that's the artist as he created art. So you're finding through the art, you're seeing the artist within the art. And then if your child asks the question, is that all he is? God is only an artist? The answer is no. That is imcha makah, that's imcha, that's tafel. That's a very outer dimension of him. If you want to talk about the Eibishter himself, obviously he's far beyond the creation that he created, which leads us to the levels of Sovev Kalaman and beyond. So let's continue learning now inside. Around halfway down the page, 1412 rather. And the line begins Chulu, Commission is Bar Le'il, and we'll start from after a parenthesis, V'yadua. So he's now going to explain our relationship with Sovev Kalaman, which again, initially seems like should be beyond us, but it's not completely, as we shall learn. V'yadua, as it's known, the B'neshamis Shayach Hasaga Gam B'chinas Sovev Kalaman. And souls is also Shayach, they're also capable of having a comprehension in Sovev Kalaman. And he's using the word hasaga, not amuna, hasaga. Some comprehension in Sovev Kalaman. So in Malak Kalaman, that makes sense, because Malak Kalaman is the energy that relates to existence, just a matter of us contemplating on it and not ignoring so-called energy within the container, the energy within every part of creation. What means hasaga in Sovev Kalaman? The loizu hasaga bulvad. And this hasaga is not just an understanding or comprehension. Sheyesh b'chinas atzmos and sof she'enu b'chinas l'slapshus be'elamus. Not just that there exists, because that you could say, okay, everyone can extrapolate that the artist, in the context especially of creation, God, is not defined by his art. That there is a whole level beyond being the artist, beyond being manifest within the art. In other words, if someone were to say, like we talk about pantheism, that nature is God, we don't say God is nature. God is obviously beyond nature, which would be Sovev Kalaman. That he's not just Mamala Kalaman, he's not defined by the existence he is creating and sustaining and so on. But he's saying, no, we're not just talking about Asaga, that there is the Metzias of something higher. Not just that there's something that's higher than manifesting the worlds. Ella, shegam b'zeh yochalias hasaga be'efon hafla de'erein sof. We can have a comprehension also in the manner of how God is beyond existence. Hafla here, the hafla meaning the wonder, the amazement, the magnitude, the majesty. There's a lot of words you can translate hafla. So in other words, also efon hafla. Not just to say God is beyond, and that's that, but also the manner by which he is completely beyond existence. We could also have which means that we have some grasp of the divine that's beyond existence. So here comes the obvious question. We're part of existence. How could existence have some form of understanding of that which is beyond existence? If you want to put it in different words, how could something after the tzimtzum understand something pre-tzimtzum when the whole tzimtzum was necessary because there would be no room for existence pre-tzimtzum? That's why there was a tzimtzum. That's what the Arizal says. that the Ein Sof filled all the whole everything. In reality, only consciousness was divine consciousness. Not only there was no existence, no room for existence. Room meaning conceptually. So how does something that is predicated on the tzimtzum? So the answer is because neshamas, even though they come into existence, and existence affects them, meaning the neshama does manifest in Ata Barosa, not the Yitzarta of Ata Nefachta, be like we learned, but that's not its essential nature. Its essential nature goes back all the way pre-existence. They come from levels that are pre-existence, so that's why they can have a comprehension, to some extent at least, in Sovev Kalam, which would seem to imply that something that's not neshamas cannot. For example, if you talk about, let's say, an animal, or even sameach and chai, whatever level of perception you say they have, if they have perception or however you explain it, but they cannot go beyond the energy that created them. That's all they can do. They're part of the system, so they can figure out what they can relate to the engineer that applied himself in creating them. But what about that which precedes existence? So there you have neshamas kadma la'elam, like we've learned. The neshamas are rooted in a higher place, so they could have asaga in Sovev Kalam. We'll still have to understand what that asaga is and what it means, but right now, that's what he's saying here. And now he says, well, commotion is like we learned earlier, just a few pages earlier, the sharshan, that the root of the neshamas is higher than Ata Barasa. It's mebchinas tehira ilah, tehirahu. The shamash and sat tehirahi. From tehira ilah shalifni at tzimtzum. That precedes the tzimtzum. The hainu, bchinas eid sof shekedem alei saratzin. And like we learned there, that it's the eid sof, not alei saratzin, which is the source of mamala kalalman, but it's higher, the kedem alei saratzin. Before that, the desire arose to create existence and God allocate resources and measured, etc. Shir atzmei b'kayach. That's where neshamas are rooted, as we learned earlier. The truth is, we learned that's even rooted higher than that, even before kedem alei saratzin. Remember the shmoya atzmi, shmoya kol batzmusei, kodem kekadmusei, helam atzmi. But here it's not relevant. It's not relevant to our conversation here, because here it's enough to say neshamas are rooted in tehiri law, kedem alei saratzin, and that's why they have the ability to have hasaga, even in the eifana flaw. Not just that there is a level of the divine beyond existence, but also in the manner of that haflaw. In other words, they can experience something of the divine that's beyond existence, even though they are within existence, because they're rooted there in the states that are higher than existence. Al kain, and therefore yesh behem hasaga the b'chinas haflaw the ein sof. And because they're rooted there, that's why they can have the hasaga, comprehension, in the haflaw, the wonder of ein sof. And haflaw is in contrast to the slapshus of ein sof within existence. Even though there's plenty of wonder there too, when you think of the divine energy within every aspect of the design of our existence and our world, and of even our human body. But here he's talking about the haflaw beyond, how God is beyond existence. Okay. So that's that. He's going to now explain what when he was baining in this, what it leads to. But let me stop if anybody wants to ask anything. Clear? Okay.
He's talking about the asaga, that there is a higher than Elam Hazeh, but still not having a asaga in the Eifen.
So, he said that we do have asaga in the Eifen haflaw.
The neshamis.
He just said that, yeah.
But average people, they don't have asaga even.
Average people have neshamas too. Everybody has a neshama. Who are you talking about? You're talking to Jews and non-Jews, you mean? A neshama is a neshama. Everybody says, every person, every yid says, neshama shenasata b'teiri. Of course, there's a difference between a Rebbe having hasag and Sovev Kalman and a That's obvious. Also, Mamala Kalam, there are differences of how we understand godliness. He said clearly, that there are differences. That's not the question. That's for sure. But the question is, how high can we go? So, relatively speaking, everybody with a neshama has the capacity to have some form of comprehension in Sovev Kalamin, what he calls Efen Hafla of Ein Sof. He didn't explain what that asaga is. I'm going to explain it based on what we learned earlier in Ayin Beis. So that's what I'm going to explain now. But clearly, that's what a neshama is. The neshamas have that capacity. But keep in mind, that initially all neshamas come down below, and therefore they cannot begin by jumping there. Like that's why they need Torah. That's why they need Torah. That's why they need the siyua of an outside light, because the eye on its own cannot see in the dark. A neshama, no matter how powerful it is, once it comes down below, it's affected by the darkness and the concealments of the tzimtzumim. However, the neshama is very matter, its ingredients, so to speak, its DNA is rooted, lifting at tzimtzum all the way in these highest levels. So you still need to generate that and manifest that. That's why we need to learn and we grow. Mutfe, murgish, muskel. And the neshama doesn't get there automatically. Everybody has to go through avodah in climbing the ladder as we go up and experience these levels higher and higher. So briefly, in the Ayin Beis earlier, in volume 1 and volume 2, a number of places, when he spoke about the Izbanunus in the Haflah, he spoke about Efen Haflah and I believe Mehusa Haflah. Here he doesn't mention Mehusa Haflah, but Efen Haflah. So briefly, if you think about it, through process of elimination, when you say that, let's go back to the example of an artist. So you see a beautiful piece of art. From the art, you know that there's an artist that created this art. Even if you've never met the artist, you could begin to see certain aspects of the artist within the art. It may be that he painted a picture of his childhood. It may reflect some of his personality, some of his mood. So you could, I don't want to say speculate, but you could try to figure out from the art something about the artist. But obviously you're not going to figure out most of it. Then you meet somebody who knows the artist, or you yourself meet the artist. Suddenly realize a whole bunch of things that you would not have known had you not met the artist. But then comes the next question. Is the artist anything but an artist? And you find out, of course he is. He's a husband, or he's a father, he's a scholar, he's this. I mean, I'm talking even on a purely human level. You suddenly realize he has a whole life outside of being an artist. And as a matter of fact, that life can actually be even more powerful than his being an artist. You can find out that his artist part of him is only his hobby. It's one small little thing that he does once in a while. Or it could be he does it more often. So even on a very human level, you can begin to figure out that there's a whole part of this artist that's outside of the art. Now the question is, how much can you get to? Now obviously, if you speak to the artist himself, you can learn a lot. But let's say you can't. From our contemplation. So the question is like this. If you're a son of the artist and you never met the artist, because you have his DNA, you're going to be able to figure out a lot more about him than someone that does not have his DNA. So now, to bring it all back to, this is a mashal, to bring it all back to our relationship with God, from this world, when you contemplate on existence, as scientists do, or as anyone that thinks about nature and the beauty and the design, you can learn tremendous amounts about God, because God created it all. And therefore you can learn about the wisdom of God, how he created it, the manner of creation. Not only that, we've learned to replicate it and create it and replicate it and turn it into many different technologies. You know, a camera is essentially a replica of the human eye. A plane is a replica of a bird. And by studying the dynamics and the engineering of these creatures, you learn a deeper science that allows you to improve your life and so on. But you also learn about God. The question is, how far can you go? So you can go pretty far, but then being a neshama that has a piece of God within us, so to speak, and chelik elekam mal mamish, or in the words he used here, neshamash and satabi, tahiri law. So we have it; it's just concealed within us. So you can extrapolate and say, if God created such a beautiful existence, how much more is there about God that I don't know in my day-to-day contemplations? And you can, through a process of elimination. For example, we learned about Hayetz Ayin Halela Yabit, the one who shaped and created the eye. Can he not see? So you ask yourself, does he see like we see? And you come to realize, no. His ability to see is because he's the creator of sight. So how does he see? How is it different than us? So you come to not just understand that he's beyond us, you could in some ways comprehend an element of transcendent sight, so to speak. What does the etzem koyach hariyah look like? Or what does riyah look like in the level of lo yabit, in the Eibishter? Like we say, le machshavei seichem. His thought, God's thought is not machshav, is not your thought. That doesn't mean you can't in some way extrapolate and say by process of elimination and by contrast, if we think a certain way, look how much Chassidus talks about, that our thought, for example, can't create anything. God's thought can create. The different things that Chassidus talks about. So you could figure out through contrast, and Yedias Hashlila sometimes is the expression, by negating and saying, okay, it's not like us, but as a process, but through that we come to understand it. And the Alter Rebbe brings from Meir Nevuchim that Yedias Hashlila, which means through negating something, if you do it enough, you can come to understanding almost like Yedias Hachiyuv. Example I've given often about it from a psychological point of view, nobody's ever seen the subconscious or the unconscious of a person. You can't see it. By definition, it's not conscious. And yet, you can somewhat figure out what it looks like. I'll give the example from sonar. For example, if you want to know if there's an object under the water and you don't see it, what do? They shoot these very powerful sound waves and they bounce off objects. And by bouncing off, they can create like a sonogram. The bouncing off creates an image. It's not a direct image, it's an image of everything that's bouncing off. The example I've given for it is, if you want to see a wall that is completely shrouded in darkness, and you can't touch it, and you can't see it, and you can't shine a light on it, is there a way for you to figure out what that wall looks like? The answer is yes. You take a rubber ball, and you start bouncing it off the wall. If it bounces back straight, you know that wall is a straight part. If it bounces back to the right, you know there's a left indentation. If you keep bouncing the ball enough times, you could create an image of the wall, though you've never seen it, and you've never shined a light on it. The ball, how it bounces back. The same thing when you talk to someone that's trained, and you see somebody reacts a certain way. They get very nervous when you start talking about their parents, for example, or nervous about a certain experience. So it's similar to touching a nerve. You realize there must be a sensitive point. So you don't see, let's say, the traumas they may have experienced in their childhood. You don't see necessarily the relationship with their parents, but by talking to them, by bouncing off certain thoughts and ideas, you can start getting a sense that there's this area, a person has something going on there. Again, it's not a perfect picture, but I'm just giving an example how through shlila, yedias hashlila, not mamalaklam, so you could figure out elements of the flaw of the divine by negating and saying he's not like us. Okay, like for example, when the Alter Rebbe writes that the Atzmus is Mitziusim Atzmusei, that he's the only existence that his own existence comes from within himself. What's the contrast? Everything else. Everything has a beginning, has a source, has a creator, except the creator. So how do we know that? I'm not talking about from Amunah, from logic, simply because if he created it all, he himself can be part of the creation. So you could, so to speak, have a hasagah and have oifana flaw of Ein Sof, and I'm just giving some examples. There's so many more. Even infinity. From the finite, we can say, okay, the infinite, we don't know what the infinite is like because we've never experienced infinity directly, but from the finite, you can extrapolate and say, okay, the infinite is not like the finite. And frankly, even in science, especially in the world of quantum mechanics and other worlds that had not been seen by a microscope or by a naked eye, It's mostly through extrapolation and through bouncing off, like I say. You see a result, so you know there must be something there. A black hole, by definition, you can't see a black hole because the gravitational pull of the star is so strong, it doesn't allow light to escape. So how could you see it? So how do we know there's a black hole? They know it because they see things around it are affected by something. So if you see, let's say, a meteorite or an asteroid or whatever it is flying somewhere in the cosmos, and then suddenly it swerves, and you start wondering, why did it swerve? Then you realize there must be something there that you can't see that's affected. It's like an invisible magnet. When you see its effect, you see a metal moving, you know there must be some magnet. There must be something that's causing it. These are just examples of being able to have asoga and coming to conclusions about certain things, coming to some understanding of an entity that you're discovering through saying it's beyond what I have, and that's how I come to understand. This is just a small sampling and taste of it. Obviously, there's so much more to be said about it, but this is an example. Now, the neshama, because it has its roots in this levels that are higher than mamal kalam and higher than existence, that's why it can have hasaga and Sovev kalam. And again, level of hasaga, that's already dependent on the individual and the level that you've grown to. But I just wanted to give some palpable examples to be able to understand something that is beyond. Now, one more point before we continue, I'll take any questions if somebody wants to ask, is that earlier in Ayin Beis in volume 1, the second half, Ayin Gimel Shvuos and so on, he spoke that the difference between Mamala and Sovev is that Mamala teaches us about the divine that energizes us, that creates us. And Sovev teaches us bittul. Because when you really come to understand our flaw, what you come to learn is that it's not the divine that is manifesting within you, that God is completely beyond. So what's the effect that has on you? That everything you are is completely, infinitely nullified compared to God. Now, nullification, not in a bad way, in a way that you're really experiencing something completely beyond us. So the first level of his bananus, Mamal Klamen, as we learned, talks about loving God and connecting to God and relating to Him. The second one creates a level of awe and reverence. Sometimes I've explained the difference between Ava and Yira. Ava is a feeling of closeness. Yira is a feeling of distance in a good way, like a respect. Wow, if God is, if Yetzer Ayin Haloi Yabit, you can imagine what God is like. So it's a whole different derech, it's a whole different respect for something that's so beyond. So the artist, you relate to the artist, that relates to the art, that's more commensurate to us, it's on our terms. So there's a bittul, obviously, but it's not, it's bittul yesh. But a bittul mitzias, or sometimes referred to Yechudei law, would come more from Sovev Kalaman because now you're experiencing something that's completely beyond you. So you realize, wow, this is something of a different reality altogether. It's not just a smarter person, so you have respect for your teacher because he's smarter than you are. Then you suddenly realize something that's completely beyond you, that's a whole different level of bittul. And that's also relevant to what we're going to learn now. You want to ask something? What?
Also,
he calls it asogi.
Chiyuv or only באופן דשלילה?
I explained it באופן של shlila because of the reason that it says. He doesn't say the word chiyuv or shlila. That was my explanation. It's not necessarily the only way to explain it, but I wanted to explain it in a way that would make sense because Sovev, at the end of the day, is beyond existence. So how do you have a chiyuv when you are? But that doesn't mean that you can't have chiyuv and Sovev also. I just explained it the way I did. I thought it would be easier to understand. It could be at some point. At some point, if a person grows enough, they can start having chiyuv there too. But that would be a little bigger jump, because you have to then, I think Mamala Kalama for most of us is already quite powerful. Sovev, of course, is even higher. Anyway, just for the record, it does not say chiyuv or shlili here at all. The Rebbe Rashab. It was my explanation. I say that clearly, and to know that it's not necessarily the only explanation, and not limited to that explanation.
Okay. Talk about the Helam Ha'atzmi. Is that the level of Sovev or is that Atzmus?
What? We're talking now about Sovev.
I understand that. That's what I'm trying to understand. when we contemplate the madrega of godliness, the level of godliness that is referred to as the Helam Ha'atzmi.
He's not mentioned. We're not up to Helam Ha'atzmi. He didn't talk about Helam Ha'atzmi.
I know he didn't. They're not here.
We'll get there when we get to Helam Ha'atzmi. Here he's talking about Sovev Kalalman.
Right, but okay. The reason why I'm asking the question is you're using this method of shlila. He's not this. He's not that. He's bigger than this. He's bigger than that. Of course, we can't define it.
That's Sovev Kalalman. Yeah.
Right. Okay, but when we say Helam Ha'atzmi, it's sort of the essential concealment. We can't understand
it. It's a whole different level. It's not what we're talking about here. I wouldn't bring that into this here. That may be the third level.
Okay, well, that was the thrust of my question, but I'll go back into absorption mode.
Helam Ha'atzmi, we'll talk about. I would say right now, Helam Ha'atzmi belongs in the third category.
Okay, thank you.
I alluded to before that the neshama is here. He's talking about Tehiri Allah, Koydem Alei Saratzen. He's not talking about the neshama says they're rooted even higher than that, which he did mention clearly earlier. Because he's talking about the second level, not the third.
Understood. Thank you.
Rabbi Jacob said when it comes to Ahava and Ira, you just, unless I misunderstood, you just said that Ahava is like a Memale and Ira is the Sovev. Is that true? Is that correct?
Not a black and white. Once
no, I sometimes but I'm saying generally speaking. That way. Generally speaking, but the problem
in this context, listen, here we're talking about Ava, all three levels of our Ava. But a certain element of Ava that is more in our terms, the closeness between us and God. And Yira, I was referring to the respect and distance that Sovev Kalami would elicit.
Correct.
So again, it was my explanation, not a definitive statement that Mamala is Ava and Sovev is Yira. Just one application of it. That's
because we always understood.
I just want to be precise, No,
I get it. Because I always thought that Ava was a higher level than Ira. You know what I mean? That's why it kind of got confusing.
There's two levels of Ava. There are two levels of Yira. It's more complicated than that. In some places, Yira is higher than Ava.
The highest Darga is Yira Law.
In Tanya, where he goes, there's Ava Tata, Yira, and Ava Elon is Yira Tata, Yira Law, In Av itself, there are many, many levels, but okay. Any other question? We'll continue now. He's going to explain. Here's what he's going to explain. He's going to say, so what does this Isbananus or Hasagan, Efen Haflav, Eden Sof elicit? And we'll contrast that with what it elicited in the Ava before of Mamal Klaman, which he didn't say explicitly is B'chol Avavcha, but the Pashtas, that's what it is. So he says like this now. Ukeshem is Bainan. And when a person contemplates, Eich she'ein sof mufla muvdil ma'elams. Ha'ein sof is mufla, is removed. Or I'd say mufla, beyond, umuvdil, and removed, separate from the worlds, meaning from existence. And here means all the elemus. The leidak elemus hatachtenim. And not from just the lower worlds. Avgam ma'elemus hayesel yenim, but also from the highest worlds, which would mean everything, all the way through Stalshalus, all the way Ak, the highest you can go to. So when a person contemplates on that, Mizbainin, what happens? Harihu Meseder, that stimulates, that generates, that awakens and arouses. He used the same word earlier, Meseder, I believe, on the fourth line, when he spoke of Mamalaklam, that awakens and stimulates and arouses b'teikev harotze, intense yearning, b'hatzimoyin, and thirst, li'cholel ba'atzmos ein sof. So when you really contemplate it, meaning that it really affects you, what it does is it causes you to have a strong yearning, an intense yearning, and longing and thirst to be encompassed in this Atzmus Ein Sof. You want to be part of it. Because you suddenly realize whatever you have is like minuscule, so small compared to that full of that experience of Ein Sof that's so beyond. Like it's like suddenly seeing reality and realizing that your reality is just a little, like a speck. U'kamei shekasav, like it says, Elecha Hashem nafshi esa. My soul rises, Elecha Hashem, to you, God. Elecha. B'bchinas kiloyin mamish. Mamish in the form of total absorption, or kiloyin could also mean, kiloyin sometimes means annihilation, but I don't want to use that word for obvious reasons, because it doesn't mean in a negative way. He means the complete absorption, like when you say kiloyin hashemen, when the oil is completely consumed. Kiloyin, a good word, is consumed. Total consumed. Or what we use the expression, klois hanefesh, that the nefesh completely expires and leaves because it wants to be absorbed in these highest levels.
It's not consumed. It's yearning to get out of yourself.
Right? And be consumed, being encompassed, so to speak, like he said, li kolel, to be encompassed in this level of elikus. Li kolel, yeah. Or lichlel, li kolel ba'asmus Ein Sof. And here's the contrast to Mamal Kalaman. The loy shahu b'chinas kiruv be'elikus. This is not a kiruv where a sense of closeness, like we learned before, the closeness with kiruv be'elikus, v'reitzu is galus alikus. It's not he's looking to be close, that the alikus should come close to him, and he wants the revelation of the divine. Kim b'chinas kaloyin v'iskalus be'erein sabaruchu. The exact opposite tenuah, movement. That you are becoming absorbed in it, instead of it becoming revealed within you, which is what he spoke about earlier. That's when you were dealing with the relationship with God as it's on our terms. Here he's talking about you wanting completely to lose yourself in the presence of this higher level of the divine. So it's completely different tenuah. Before it was a yirid v'amshacha, and this is an aliyah niskalus. If you remember Rekor, he said, Loi b'chinas, ein b'chinas aliyah v'iskalus. So yitzia begeder kelim. Here is the opposite, it's going out of your kelim. U'k'may shekosav, mili b'shamayim v'imcha lechafatzti. The famous pasuk the Alter Rebbe used, but the pasuk means, mili b'shamayim. V'imcha, nothing but you I want. Who do I have in heaven? In other words, it's not, there's nothing but I want but you. I don't want me. I don't want you to be present within me. I want to be completely encompassed within you. That's the meaning. He doesn't want gili eir. He's not looking for a revelation of the divine. But rather likol batzmusay. That's what the Alter Rebbe said. Ich will nicht dein Gan Eden. Ich will nicht dein Elam Haba. Ich will dich allein. I don't want your Gan Eden, I don't want your Elam Haba. That's Gili Elikus. That's how God reveals himself. It's a very powerful revelation. It's higher than the concealment of the divine in existence, but it's still a Gili. He wants, I want you. He doesn't bring the Alter Rebbe here because Dich could be Atzmus Mamish, and here he's talking about Sovev Klalman. But regardless, the point is that this is more of an experience of wanting to become similar to what he says in Perek Yutes and Tanya, that in Neshama Ner Hashem Nishma Sodom, like a flame that wants to be absorbed in its source. Every Neshama wants to be absorbed in the source, even though it loses its identity. But that's what it wants to go. It wants to go back to its source, as opposed to revealing the divine and where you are. Rotze versus Shuv, sometimes the expression would be. He used the word Rotze here. The first level would be more of a Shuv, bringing the Gili within us. Okay. That's level 2.
Can you repeat the question?
Let me stop. Anybody want any clarification or anything? Any questions?
I probably asked him this question first time around. I understood everything he said. Is it It seems like this is an unnatural for a neshama and a goof. I understand how one can have that contemplation, but the notion that the neshama desires once it contemplates that level, nothing but to be included in that greater level of godliness, not to be a speck, but to be part of this more real, if you will, whole. But that being said, like you said, to do that, to want to have that yearning and to even contemplate being included in a level of godliness is much more expansive than the experience in the goof. It seems for the neshama in the goof like an unnatural or counterintuitive contemplation. It says once you contemplate it, you'll want to be included, but it's not natural for a being to want to be extinguished in the face of something greater than itself. I understand it's ideal. It's how you want to contemplate that level. You have to be batal. You have to negate yourself essentially to be absorbed into the greater godliness. But it seems he's saying here it's a logical imperative. Once you contemplate that, you want to be wrapped up inside that. But I'm wondering, as I sit here in my skin, like when I think about that, I think about, well, I got to give up everything here. I got to give my identity. I gotta just what am I? What if I go there? What am I here?
Well, that's coming from a person who hasn't contemplated on Sovev Kalam. What you're describing, you're saying, if I'm in the world of Mamala Kalaman, I don't want to necessarily go to Sovev Kalaman. But the point here is there are people who contemplate and want the truth. They don't want to live in their delusion that everything is about them. So when they actually do contemplate it, it becomes the strongest desire. What you're saying is the resistance of someone in the world of Mamala Kalam to Sovev Kalam, but not someone who's actually contemplating on this. When they contemplate on this, it makes total sense because their identity, the greatest place they can be, the identity is to be absorbed. It's far more superior than their identity as they are in this world. And they come to realize that emes. That's number one. So number two, they don't look at it as being extinguished. They don't see themselves as losing anything. They see themselves as gaining and becoming far greater. Mm-hmm. But if a person still resists, that I can tell you, it tells you they're not yet on Sovev Kalam level, which is fine. It's like I said, when someone starts the Avodah, it's much more on their terms. It takes work to really come to a place where your bittul b'mitzias to you is more important than being an as you called it, an identity of your own.
Yeah, I don't. I wasn't suggesting it's not possible. I was honing in on whether it's natural.
A human being on their own would seem to make sense that self-interest always is most important. But remember here, there's two things. First of all is the contemplation. Number two is the neshama has actually its DNA from that place. So it's not losing itself. It's going back to its deepest source.
Rediscovering itself. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Anyway, the general rule is that anyone that goes through the levels of transcendence and you see their entire life. Look, the Rebbe became Rebbe in 1950. He gave up his whole personal life as a result. If you think about it, did he give up something or did he become greater? You know, there's always an element from the outside. It seems like a sacrifice. You know, why would someone become a military person, ready to sacrifice their life for other people? And yet there are people that give their life for that in the fullest sense of the word. And some people just can't see themselves ever doing it. You know, like, you have someone say, how could you go serve others? Why don't you serve yourself first? But that's exactly the battle that goes on between self and higher purpose. But those that come to that level of higher purpose and they're ready to be moiser nefesh for it, for them, they're not looking like they're giving something up. They've come to a point. Now, you or I may not fully appreciate it, and we may not understand it. That's why we're not on that level. But that there are people on that level, I have no doubt about that. There were Jews who could leave Russia at the end of World War II, and they stayed knowing that they most likely would be arrested and killed to save some other Jews. And there was literally gave their lives for it, and they did it with simcha and joy. Now, I'm not saying it has also a certain sad side to it because they actually died and were killed as a result. But for them, that Messias Nefesh, when they're in that level, that was like, One of them even said to his friend said, I think we may have saved enough Jews already. Now we can leave. So his response to him was, he said to him, I never knew that in Mesiras Nefesh there are limits. Like, there's numbers. So again, now, I don't think everyone can do that. There are people who were tortured under Stalin, and they became informers, even Chassidish Jews. And there are others that would die before they would inform on anyone. Because sometimes people can't tolerate the ability, torture, or threats, and so on, and they buckled. Now, what makes one person wired one way, another is another discussion. I'm just giving some practical examples of it. But some people would turn in their mothers to save their own skin. And some people would never. And you say, 1 second, where's the self-preservation? So I think you can...
Yes. Yeah. Excellent, helpful, Mashalim.
Now, listen, Mesiras Nefesh could also be, you feel you're giving up something, but it's worth it, because what you're getting in return is greater than what you have. I didn't say it's all, again, black and white, either or. And then there are levels where you don't feel you're giving up anything. You feel like you're becoming part of the creator, so to speak.
Yeah.
But keep in mind, the kavanah is not, even though this is a high level, the kavanah is not to be encompassed in itself. The kavanah is dira b'tachtenim. Here he's talking about a level of bittul that we reach. But then, the kavanah is ratzeh and shuv. We have to come back to this world and engage. However, imagine once you have the bittul of Sovev kalam that he's talking about here, and then you return, not because you want to be an identity, but because that very same Hashem that said, you want to be part of me? Now I'm telling you, go back down below and do your work. Now you're doing the work not because for self-interest, but you're doing that's part of the bittul. So keep in mind that ultimately it all comes together.
Yes, beautiful. Really, really beautiful, Rabbi. That was spectacular. Thank you. Really appreciate that.
Yeah. And that's where Yichud Elah, Yichud Elah will be joined. And we have ultimately Atzmus that's higher than Mamala and Sovev. Right now he's talking about these two levels.
Yeah, I see where we're headed. Thank you.
Right. So let's do the parentheses, which is an interesting parentheses, brings us back to what he said something earlier. Remember Bina, because he's going to bring it back to Mesiras Nefesh Nafshecho. So remember he said, Afilu hu, Neitlas Nafshecho, he said, hu, the level of Alma Diskasia, which is Bina that elevates the Midas, or the Midas elevate Bina both ways, all the way to Keser, which is higher than Malakalam, remember, is Panimi, is the spheres. Keser is the Mazal, that's the higher level that we're talking about, Sovev Kalam. So in the parentheses, he says like this now. V'yesh lemer, this level that we just talked about, being encompassed batzmusei, as opposed to revealing the divine, but rather being consumed or absorbed, shezeu inyan sha'aliyah hi al yedei bina canal. So remember, he said the aliyah is through bina. He said that very clearly. Bina netelas neshamas lale simam the machshava el yena, quoting from the Emek HaMelech canal. B'shema Emek HaMelech. So on the previous page, middle of the page, the new paragraph, he quoted the Emek HaMelech Shar Elam Atayu, where he talked about the aliyah that bina causes to machshava le'en to moiches tema, the aliyah through bina. Yeah, because it's like the interface. And also the Amshachi said, okay, I'm just looking there quickly. Yeah, through Avodah Lamata, the 49 leads you to the 50th Bina. Yeah, okay. And this halach, praise the Yichud Shlim. Good. So he says this is the level that we're talking about, is the level of Bina. That kashazeh b'bchinas Bina, hayin b'chinas hasogav is bonus. So Bina, we know, is not Keser itself. You're doing a level of Bina is Havana, Hasoga, it's a contemplation, an understanding, a comprehension v'izbonis and the contemplation, harizeh b'chinas aliyah v'iskalus. So you see here that it's leading to aliyah v'iskalus, not hamshacha. That tells you that it's like we're talking about the level of his hasaga that leads to being absorbed to something higher. So now he's going to compare it to chachma. How is chachma different than bina? I think one of you asked, how does chachma fit into this? So I said that chachma is not yet hasaga. Chachma is just a nekuda. But now he's going to explain actually that chachma's effect on us is different than bina's effect. Chachma, I think he's going to say, is connected to Hamshacha and Bina to Allah. Let's see how he says it. But bottom line is, this is connected to what we learned before Bina, which is the level of B'chol Nafshecho. We'll soon get to that. So he says, the B'chinas HaChachma, Hainu B'chinas Riyah. Chachma is the level of Riyah, not Shmiyah. Shmiyah is Avon of Asaga, like Shema Yisrael, which we'll talk about later as well in the Maimer HaMagbi. Chachma is Riyah. Chachma is that resonating clarity. It's only a spark. It's not fully blown understanding of something, but there's a certain deep resonance in Chachma Deriyah. Hariyesh Eifen Shuv B'chinas Shuv Dafke. So Chachma, because it's Riyah, there's an Eifen in Chachma that's connected to Shuv, not Rotzeh. Shuv means that when you see it, it like draws it in. There's a Riyah that leads to a yearning like a Rotzeh, but he's saying there's also a level of Shuv. Like he explains in Samach Vov, if you want to look it up, it's the Maimer Ki Kasher HaShamayim in Samach Vov. The Gam B'chinas HaRotzeh de Chachma, he's qualifying, and even the aspect of Rotzeh and Chachma, because there's always Rotzeh and Shuv, everything brings to a Rotzeh and Shuv. Bina could also bring to a Shuv, because when you contemplate, I'm a Malakalam, and with Bina, it brings the Elgil Elikus down below. But here he's talking about Bina as a level of leading to a yearning and a longing to connect and to be absorbed in the source. In Chachma, even the level of Rotzeh, he says a level of Dveikus. So clearly Dveikus is not the same thing as Aliyah V'Iskalus. Dveikus means attachment, connection. He doesn't elaborate here, but he's clearly saying that Chachma is either a level of Shuv or Dveikus. Bina is Aliyah V'Iskalus, according to what he's discussing here. It says elsewhere, and that drush in Samach Vov. So I don't want to necessarily elaborate because it's not so, everything is important, but I think we can move on. It's just qualifying, comparing Bina to Chachma here.
Dveikus is not Halo?
The Dveikus is no, because Dveikus means you feel it's a connection, but it's not losing yourself entirely. I think that's what he says in Samach Vov. That Aliyah V'Iskalus can be where you completely get absorbed. That's like a Rotzeh, complete Rotzeh, and Dveikus is you get completely attached. You are like the flame within the source flame, but it's not completely lost in it. I'm almost sure that's what he says. I have to look it up to be honest. I think that's what he distinguishes. So there's three things. In other words, there's real Shuv, Hamshacha, there's Halah, Aliyah V'Iskalus Rotzeh, and then there's Dveikus. That seems like something in between. But I'd like to look it up before I say for sure conclusively. I don't remember right now. I remember I explained it the first time we learned it more in detail.
Shemaim is the name of the mimer in Samach Vav.
Yeah, Kikar Shera Shamayim. It was also quoted earlier in Ayin Beis, if you want, page 1234.
Thank you.
Let me just see. Maybe here it says something. Yeah, he brings it also in bottom of 1234.
Why is the Rotzeh the Chochma b'chinas Dveikus? Why Chochma and not Bina?
That's why I told you should look in Samach Vov. He says clearly, he's telling us to look there. So I would have to look to answer your question. I think Ria is connected more to more internal, but we'll see. I'm not positive. Shmiya. Okay.
Is this notion of Ria something that's like more memela? It's more automatic. Like if you see it, like you don't even contemplate. You want to be part of it. When you see the reality of how God of this greater godliness, there's no contemplation. You immediately realize this is where the reality is, and you attach yourself to it. Or is
Yeah,
that
but
giving
that's
that?
but here that's not the point here. Here he's saying is the level of shuv, not rotze. That's what he's saying here.
I know. I don't understand how. Whatever. I'll go take a look at the mimer. Samachlav. I was trying to.
Yeah, I said explicitly, I'm not going into the details. If you want to look it up by all means. I would have to look it up if I wanted to talk about it. I do remember discussing it more at length the first time we learned it. I don't feel it's so necessary for the whole flow here, but by all means.
Just it's good chassidus. Thank you. I'll check it out.
Okay. V'zeu b'chol nafshecho. And this is the level of b'chol nafshecho. So, which he says, afilu hu neitel es nafshecho. Shu be'ein sof ha-sevav kalam. This is an Eidin Sof ha-sevav kalam, and this is going out of ourselves. V'hu inya mesidus nefesh. Mesidus nefesh. Like he said, the elevation, going out of Geder Kelim. Hainu mesidus kol aretzenis. Nefesh also from the word ratzon. That you're giving away, you're sacrificing, you're offering all your desires. Like he said, im chalecha. He doesn't desire any giluyim. Imamala you want the gilui alakus. You want more of it because it's like quenches your thirst in a way that you want more water. Here, it's the other way around. You don't want any of the giluyim. Rakli kolil b'bchinas atzmus ein sof. The desire is just to be encompassed in the core ein sof. That's this level. So it's a very different type of avodah, b'chol nafshecha b'mesidus nefesh, in contrast to b'chol levavcha, which is filling your heart with the ava. This is the ava that is going outside of yourself. By dezeh, and when a person has this level of b'chol nafshecha b'mesidus nefesh, mamshichim b'chinas Mazal elyon. That's what he began, if you recall, with Mazal, the neshama. The Mazal elyon, which is the level of Keser, hainu amshachim b'chinas ha-Keser. So this now draws down from the level of Keser, liyas yichud yudke b'chinas yichud hashlim. In the beginning of Yudke, yichud hashlim, like he said in the words of the Emek HaMelech on the previous page, he said these words, those are the last words of the Emek HaMelech, the bottom of page 1411, previous page. Yichud hashlim, if you recall what that is, it's a total zivuk shlim, yichud hashlim, panimius, like isha and einai, yeah. He says in Ayin Beis Siv Samach Zayin. Remember that expression he brought at the previous page as well, the Mazal. Where he talks about children, life, and parnasa, livelihood, which says Hakol Tole is Toli b'mazal le b'schusa, Talia Milsa. So he says Hakol Toli b'mazal de dikna. It all depends on the mazel of dikna, of the zokin, of the beard. Dikna is the level of keser. Yud gimel tikuni dikna. Kihu amizavgam. Because it's that level that joins them together. Like we learned earlier about his taklusa, chachma bina and zon, their yuchud is through connecting through keser. Next page, 1413. V'hu kamosh koser b'zeh achle dafayin Ayin Beis. The yichud vovke hu aideh chesed. That the yichud of vovke, yudke vovke, that's through chesed. That's one of the 10 spheres. Ach yichud yudke lo talia chibura dilahun bechesed. But the Yud is not dependent, its union. On Chesed, ela b'mazal talia. And that would be arich, dikna. Ayin Moshe Kosev al zeh b'biyud azeh b'agos l'sham. U'kamoshe Kosev ba'abir devinigdashti. Rebbe Rashab is bringing many sources, actually sources he discussed earlier in this hemshech, in this volume. Like he says in L'Kutei Torah in the Bir of Nigdashti, the Yichud Yudke Aidei Mesiras Nefesh. So this is a higher Yichud of Yudke, not Vovke. Vovke is like Mamala Kalalman, Pnimius. Zoh, Malchus is Vovke. Yudke is Chachman Bina, or which is united through Keser, Mazal. That's through Mesiras Nefesh. V'hainu, which means Shaidei Mesiras Nefesh, the B'chol Nafshecho, through ready to give your life, meaning giving away all your desires and being encompassed and absorbed in the source, who neitlis nafshecha b'chinas aliyah v'iskalus. Neitly takes his nefesh, like he said, Bina elevates these nefoshes in a state of elevation and iskalus being encompassed, absorbed, and through that, I should have read it a little differently. Through that, mamshichim b'chinas mazolas el yenim liyas b'chinas yichud yudkei. You draw down your mamshich, you're transmitting from the mazolas al yenim of Keser that there should be the yichud of Yudke in the highest level of yichud. Okay. So this is a little Kabbalistic. It doesn't really explain what this means in Aveda. But the level that we're talking about essentially is that you're bringing down a level of Elokus that's higher than existence. In Mamala Kalam Yichud Vovke, you're bringing down the divine, you're revealing the divine within existence. And here you're revealing the divine that's beyond existence. And that's through Mesiras Nefesh, V'ahavta b'chol nafshecha. What he has not discussed yet is b'chol moedecha, the third level, which will be discussed in 11 pages from now. Page 1424. Because going forward now, he's going to talk more about who. This level of who, Bina or Keser, the level of Sovev Kalamin. But in the process, he's also going to talk about the third level as well, in between, throughout. But the next 11 pages is a big discussion on the level of who. This, I'm also wondering how much we should read inside, but I'll decide as we go along. Because as you start reading, it's just seeing how many things are relevant. But I probably will sum it up for sure. And I don't know if I'll read every section, depending how dense it gets. But as far as the lay of the land goes, like the general flow, keep in mind, we're talking about the interface, Lamata Lamayla Mamayla Lamata, through Tefillah and Torah. Here, primarily, we're now the section since page 1350 in Torah But Torah is illuminating in turn the Neshamas as they are below. And as the Neshamas get illuminated, they climb. As we're talking from the level of B'chol Avavcha, B'chol Nafshecha, and then we're going to get to B'chol Meidecha. And this is all going to be connected, obviously, how the soul affects the animal soul. Bottom line is, it's all about the interface. And we're now talking about these 2 and then 3 levels, Mamal Kalaman on our terms, Sovev Kalaman on God's terms, and then the joining and union of both. That's the overall picture. But and it's Oir HaRiyah, of course, as well, which is going to come together in this context. The Riyah as the eye sees within the vessel with its limitations, and there's the Etzem Koyach HaRiyah in the source. But then there's also the third level, which is one of the levels that the Rebbe Rashab never gets back to, but the Maimer Ve'neinu Me'iris, he does talk about one higher level, which is the Atzmus level, higher than Mamala and Sovev. So we shall get there, but that's somewhat of a summary, and I think I'll stop here. Good place to stop at the end of the paragraph on page 1413. Go ahead. Any questions? Any thoughts? It's coming together, right?
Yeah, it's starting to come together. This is very dense and cryptic Kabbalah here, but and I think I know the answer to my question, or at least the direction of the answer. But it seems to be saying here that when one contemplates this level of Sovev, that you're tapping into, says the Mazal here essentially, which is Keser, or you said Arich,
Sovev,
and
yeah.
and but in so doing, you can't necessarily change anything in your mamala experience. Be saying dafka because it's predetermined. Essentially, you can't change the will of God, and so the question then becomes, okay, well then what's the
What do you mean you
purpose of the
can't
effort?
change? What do you mean by you can't change? What do you mean you can't change?
Well, that's the issue. Can you?
No, one second. I don't remember using
Okay.
that language. You
Okay,
can't
well,
change.
the whole idea of bonai chayev zanai, that these things that one gets
Oh,
in
they're
life.
dependent on the Mazal, not on schus.
Yes,
That's what you mean?
exactly, exactly.
Okay.
So then, how can you then bring that back into the shuv and affect change in our reality? I mean, the ayin.
Because you're changing it through bringing the Mazal. From the Mazal, it's affecting things down below into Bonachayim Zayin. It's like when you go, someone, let's say, is having difficulty with Parnasa, and they go for a bracha, and the bracha works. So the bracha affects their life. They went to a place, to a higher place, to draw from there, because they needed to access the Mazal, not just the schus.
Thank you. That was helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. Look, in general, on a very practical level, we know everything is midah keneged midah, meaning measure for measure. If a person wants a special bracha, so the best keli you make for it is by making yourself in that, putting yourself in that position. So let's say a person gives tzedakah $1 a day. So there's a certain bracha that comes from that. Hashem gives tzedakah to you, but for whatever reason, a person needs a lot more brachas. They said, you know what, I'm going to give $1,000. So our understanding is that makes a keli that Hashem goes beyond so-called his allotment that he gave you. That's the idea in Avodah, B'chlal. So an Avodah al pitam v'das is going to lead usually to Hamshach al pitam v'das, meaning commensurate to that. If you go out of your own comfort zone, there'll be a certain element of Hamshach that will go out of the divine, the cosmic comfort zone, so to speak.
Understood.
So that's in general a process. Now, obviously, what I just said sounds very transactional and almost like the opposite of real bittul. Because bittul would mean you want to be encompassed in God, not because you're getting something for it, but because you really just want to be part of godliness. So it doesn't work exactly in this context. I just wanted to point that out as a overall statement. Because real bittul means there's no agenda at all. You're just doing it. But the bottom line is, there is an element of Mesiras Nefesh does bring certain brachas, namshachas, even if it was not your intention. You did open up channels from Keser, because you've accessed Keser through your Mesiras Nefesh, you know.
Yeah, I meant to suggest if you want to improve the world, affect positive change in the world, not necessarily in your own lot, but in general, bichlal, you might want to rise like the rising tide, like you bring more godliness into the world so everybody gets lifted up, including yourself. You're not really doing it for yourself. You're doing it l'shem shamayim, to bring godliness into the world.
Yeah.
But so it's kind of transactional, but I didn't mean it from the transactional perspective.
I went beyond your question. I'm talking now in general, the whole discussion of reaching higher levels and stuff like that. Yeah.
I heard a class by Rabbi Naftali Silverberg, and someone asked a question, and the result of that question was that they kind of figured out a hack. I don't know if you could combine these two ideas here. That he said that the only free choice we have is Yiras Shamayim, Hakol B'dei Shamayim Chutz Miras Shamayim, especially the three keys that we're talking about. So if you need, let's say, money for Yiras Shamayim, then that is in your power. That somehow it does become a power that you hold, a key that you can hold. So, like for Parnasa, for example, if maybe maybe taka.
Why would you need money for your Shemayim? What's the context?
Because your Shemayim means you give more tzedakah, or your Shemayim means you support a yeshiva, whatever it is. No?
Oh, okay. I hear. Okay, I understand. Okay, yeah, I acknowledge that.
Yeah, no, I'm just thinking about how yeah, I guess it's tzedakah. That's the only example that I could think of as far as, but with life, I guess you just go on and do what you need to do. Like with health-wise, let's say if chas v'shalom someone's not healthy and they want the key to health, then they use their health somehow for your Shemayim. Like they start running somewhere. I don't know.
Yeah, I understand. I don't know. It's somewhat tangential to this, but I understand what you're saying. Yeah. So let me stop here. I'll stop the recording. Page on top of 14.